Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for July of 2026. I have 6 albums I will be talking about. I have 6 releases that dropped in January that I will be talking about in this video with time codes listed in the description for each individual release if you would like to jump around in the review. This month had a handful of surprises and some really fun stuff drop in it, along with one farewell that you'll find my thoughts on if you watch that. Give it a like if you're excited, and let's go ahead and get started. I started my year like I'm assuming a handful of music fans started their year when following new releases, and that's check out Don't Be Dumb, because it finally came out, the highly anticipated A$AP Rocky record, and the first time, and this marks the first time I'll be talking about a project of his on the channel, in fact. I'm no stranger to Rocky music. I did talk about One Train and the Posse Cuts video, but I've never covered one of his records. And I think he's got a relatively solid discography. Some highs, a couple lows. But I was excited to see what he was going to drop with this, considering he's had some interesting singles drop over the last couple of years. Some of which don't end up on here, oddly enough. But I think that Rocky dropping this record with this focal point of just keeping your mind right, don't be dumb, so to speak, with a menagerie of topics surrounding that, whether it be talking about gossip, talking about being swept up in the industry, or in some instances in relationships and how you handle that sort of back and forth. Most of which I think landing with a pretty solid success rate. I think that this is a nice little pocket of sounds that I think Rocky uses to create a really fun listen that has equal parts accessible moments and some fun genre pivots to help make for an engaging listen. You know, I enjoy how it starts pretty by what I'd expect from Rocky. I think that Order of Protection and Helicopter are a really good reintroduction to Rocky's vibes, and I think that it's a good sort of reaffirmation of, hey, I can still do this. With Stole Your Flow being a real jugular moment. I know people have talked about how it is sort of some sneaks at Drake, and I very much am glad to see Rocky clap back with a really strong song that I think is very, again, straight and to the point, but in a way that I think feels very indebted to Rocky's style. I do think that some of the back half of the record really is where I feel like some of the true heart of this album really lays, because while there's some tracks like Stay Here for Life and Playa that very much continue the cycle of Rocky sort of easing into his own groove, not again faltering. I think that Rocky and Brent Faiyaz come together really well actually on Stay Here for Life. I think that the hook of that is really catchy, if not a bit drawn out as far as the song itself. There's a couple tracks like that I feel like kind of over the Say They're Welcome just a little bit. But I think that especially by the time Stop Snitching and Shut the Fuck Up really light the track listing up with some heat to get more blunt and direct with the theming of the record. It gives a good sort of fire for the listener that fizzles out into some real elegant splendor through its end. I really enjoy the track Robber with Jochi. I think that it's smooth as hell. I like seeing the two of them trade on the song, and I think that the instrumental is just absolutely nice. I think that the double song on here, the title track and Trip Baby, are a nice sort of climax or resolution, I guess, to the build up of some of the tension within the storytelling of Robbery from a sonics to lyrics perspective. But I think fleshes out into rounds out into a really good song. But I think that this record is really solid. I think it's a really strong return for Rocky. I'm glad to see him bounce back with a record that is fun, if not as big or as widespread as he was maybe teasing it. It does sit in some realms that maybe feel a bit more atypical for him than bold, but I like the boldness on here, and I like the stuff that sounds like his typical flair too. I don't think he's really faltered in that regard, but I think this is a solid ass release that I think was a great way to start the year. I'm giving this a 7 out of 10.
Why the judge tryna make a nigga suffer? 15, but I'm 17. What a crazy deal, dinner trade.
I've been wondering what IDK was teasing at the end of last year, and I wasn't expecting it to be a project that I've kind of been waiting for him to drop after becoming a fan of his. a handful of years ago. I've seen that he likes to approach his records with a vision, and I've always appreciated the vision. See my reviews of Simple and F65. But even in those instances, I feel like they weren't always tight and well realized. But on this mixtape, ETDS, Even the Devil Smiles, I very much think he focused, he locked the fuck in, and delivered easily his tightest batch of tracks that I think present an interesting other side to his artistry that I think he handles really well. IDK has not been the type to really talk much about his stint in prison. He hasn't talked much about, at least on the handful of releases he's done throughout this decade so far. He's very much left a lot of that in the background, but considering this would have been the year he got out of prison and using that as a point of inspiration to really drive him into a world of reflection that I think sees him coming together with legends and artists that are popping off now and creating a just stacked batch of tracks with production that has moments that leans into an embracing and homage to mixtape culture that I'm always happy to see. That DJ Woo Kid intro took me the fuck back. But I think his ability to set the stage on the intro Halo, where he sort of still kind of buries the lead a bit before throwing in his jail sentencing into the third verse as a plot twist, I think is a really good catalyst for the next couple of tracks, detailing the life that led him there and what it brought him as a rowdy youth. You know, something that he has teased in other records in his past, but you know, there's an edge to it that blends well with the still smooth production that he's backed himself with over the last couple of records that I think creates a really good sort of just vehicle for IDK to really reminisce in a way that is fun to see. I think the stretch from Cop through Flocka is a well-detailed sequence that is a point where the album just coalesces to its just rawest strengths. You know, I think that the paranoia and uneasy on Cop and talking about not wanting to end up a piece of the system before detailing the moment where it all went wrong on a track like Scary Mary, and his mentality in prison throughout the next couple of tracks, I think is just executed really fucking well. Obviously, I think the features on the record as a whole, I mean, Black Thought on P.O., and Joey Valence and Bray on Clover is a lot of fun. It's a really good showcasing of IDK's artistry in those two chunks. But like the DMX and MF Doom interpolations on their respective songs, I think are handled well. And the parts where he's trading bars with Doom on Flocka is honestly one of my favorite parts, especially considering what feels like the mood of him reflecting heavily on his jail time feels very reminiscent of like parts of early Doom. And I really appreciate that. I just think it's a really interesting pseudo-tribute, so to speak. As a whole, I think that this record delivers on a well-done package. I think the moments where it sort of deviates away from that don't harm the project either. I think that the just pure drum and bass worship on Stigma is a really cool moment. And the ways where he keeps that mood balance on tracks like Life for a Life and Scrambled Eggs, the way that he kind of closes it with that kind of mood is just a full picture moment that I think helps sort of sandwich this release together. I really enjoy this mixtape. I think that it's great. I'm happy to see IDK getting his flowers too. I've seen this record getting some praise throughout the last month, and I'm happy to see it. He's a guy that I think has a really strong pen game, has always delivered on his projects more than not, and I think that this is just, again, still easily one of his best batches of tracks. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. I think that it's really fucking strong, and I absolutely adore it.
The year was 86, he was waiting on his bitch in the Mercedes playing Prince If I Was Your Girlfriend back in 99.
While I've never talked about the verbal acrobatics of one Roc Marciano, I'm no stranger to his pen game and his style, and 656 feels like the kind of round table of comfort that I would expect with the sort of quick release nature of this. You know, the album art is of like a zip disc, and this very much fits that bill. He's in and out the themes if they're there. If a song's got a topic, it's usually pretty surface value, but the lyrical tapestry is still as verbose and as dense as ever. You know, whether he's flipping literal acrobatic allegories like on Trick Bag or on Trapeze, where it feels like he's flipping these Olympic metaphors into armed robberies. He has a great way of balancing that gangster style with an elegant juxtaposition, a la on like Yves Saint Moron or on Vanity in particular. I feel like Tracy Morgan Vomit also kind of like starts with that kind of comparison, talking down to somebody's fashion style as being just beneath them, but then by the end of that track really subverts it to the same breath of that kind of armed robbery gangster style. Ultimately, I think this album's biggest setback is some of the production. It doesn't necessarily all sound bad, but I think some of the sample choices and minimalism on some of the tracks work better on some than others. You know, obviously I think the sample on tracks like Easy Bake Oven are iconic and very much like classic in their lane. And I think the simplicity on a track like Yves Saint Moron works well to let his words just hit like a rapid fire flurry to the dome. But I just think that out of records that feel like real by the numbers, by the business releases from an artist, especially one that feels very vacuum packed and tight, I've heard better, but I've also heard a lot worse. And I feel like if you're wanting the sort of like textbook example of a very solid Roc Marciano project where he's filling the meter with rhyme after rhyme and still setting a stage really well, you can't really go wrong with this. But I've also heard him do better on a full-length release. I'm giving this a 7. It's very fucking solid as far as like where it stands as a record. It is very solid. It's a very solid surprise release that dropped back in January.
The stage has been lit. Get up on your feet.
While I didn't think I was that up-to-date on Megadeth's discography, I will admit the only reason why I'm even listening to this self-titled album is that it's being billed as their last album, and I very much didn't come into this with the highest of expectations, and I very much lived up to those low expectations in glorious splendor, I guess. It is an album that very much sounds like an old beast fading away and has the lyrical sheet of your once neat uncle who just very much went off the deep end in the worst way. I am baffled at some of the songs on here, like Hey God and Another Bad Day. And I Don't Care, if only because I Don't Care is like the worst kind of I'm not mad, I swear guys track written by a guy who used to at least have some tactfulness to being defensive against aggressors. Obviously, I know that Dave's kind of gone just in a very right-wing territory with his ideologies, and it does shine in some of those moments in ways that I think is just kind of wild to see, again, from the guy that wrote Peace Sells, but I digress. The production on here is as tepid and too pristine as you could imagine from a legacy band of this caliber. I don't think it's too dissimilar from what some of his contemporaries are doing. I just don't think that the songs themselves are written in a way that makes them all that interesting either. There's some moments where sure, that vintage Megadeth sound shines. Some of the shredding solos that come out on this do still sound like Dave hasn't really lost his edge as a player, but I think that the band has lost its edge and Dave has lost his edge in every other facet, and this album feels like it's trying too hard in some instances to fire off on those same sharp cylinders and just shows its age horrendously. I mean, the best moment on the record is probably Let There Be Shred, and it's in itself kind of cringe, but it is a moment where we get to see Dave shred it up on the guitar. Between that and the last song, those are like the two moments where the band is like trying to bow out gracefully on a record where they just don't do that at all. I do think the album comes around on a really earnest note, with the last track, the last note being this like swan song goodbye that I think is probably the best written song on the album, but I would hope so, considering that surface level emotions feel like very much the MO on a lot of this, and waving goodbye is a pretty simple enough emotion at the end of the day. I do think that the Ride the Lightning cover that is the final song is just a fart joke at the end of a really unfunny movie, but it is a pretty fucking funny fart joke for how bad it is. I don't like this record, if that wasn't obvious. I probably like it a bit less than Dystopia, the last Megadeth album that I listened to, if only because Dave's age shows more on here than it did on there, and it was already showing kind of badly on there. I'm going to give this a 2. It's really not that good, and its highlights are far outweighed from the bevy of lowlights that coat this thing. It truly is a piece of shit. I will be doing a Megadeth discography review probably sometime later on in the year, but just know this is ranking amongst that bottom.
I orbit the earth whenever I'm recording a verse. When I'm ready to drop, said he gonna report on it first. Play my album for the corp.
Now, the one drawback of me doing these listening logs once a month as opposed to talking about new music week to week is that there are some very quickly dropped and by the same artist sort of overshadowed not too far later that occur, and J. Cole dropping this Birthday Blizzard EP before the fall off was a fun moment when it happened, but we're in a post-fall off world now as of posting this, and I have heard it, but you have to wait for my thoughts on that album next month. As far as my thoughts on this Blizzard, having spun the fall off, it feels like Cole dropped this with the purpose of knowing that this is what his fans were really, really wanting, but there's a lot of the fall off where he wants to focus on other stuff. So he gave his fans this to give them some heat to really stew with while it was freezing outside back in January. Because this EP has a lot of potent what people want from Cole, as far as similarly to Roc Marciano, just dense rhyme schemes, bar flipping, lots of punchlines coming in there, but with a little more fire than what was seen on your typical Roc Marciano flair. There's a lot of hype shit on this EP that I think lends to a nice appetizer of giving the people what they want. I think that it is a great showcasing of that side of Cole too, and a nice concentrated dose that I think works very effectively. I think the instrumentals he decided to hop on, like on Bronx Zoo or on Winter Storm, really add to that chopping it up in the cold winter storm energy that it feels like he's trying to channel on this. Obviously, similarly to the IDK stuff, I think the DJ Clue introductions and all that sort of stuff that leans into mixtape culture I think is really nice, and I enjoy what Cole did with it here. I think it's interesting that he decides to sort of really also bring the listener down to his level, and some of the bars spinning, there's some bars where he does talk about being in the top 3 conversation, but wanting to just go back home and do his thing, something he's very much been doing throughout the promotion of the fall off. Not really a whole lot of grand concepts or interesting sort of depth to this. It's just Cole rapping his ass off and seemingly having a lot of fun on the mic and celebrating his birthday in a way that feels very much him. But this is a solid EP. It was like a 7. It's a solid little appetizer, and I enjoyed spinning it back in January, but I also have not been spinning it now that the fall off is here.
It ain't that way. I woke up in a sweat, but yesterday still stuck to me like glue. It's not in a picture.
There's one album I was heavily anticipating for this year. It was By Storm's debut. I've enjoyed the singles they've dropped to tease this release, and I like that sonically it showed that they were still wanting to branch out, be bold and experimental, continue digging down the rabbit hole, so to speak, with where they left us. And by the time we get to Phoenix, for those who don't know, By Storm are Richie and Parker Corey from Injury Reserve, continuing on in the wake of Step Is Lost, but instead of continuing that group and its sort of identity, they're being respectful to their friend and just pillaging off on something else while keeping the spirit of where the group is going intact. And I love that about this. I love the whole concept of this group. It's very interesting. And I think that Richie and Parker really curated an experience to take the listener through what feels like has been just a weird process of grief. In tandem with their life continuing to go on and aspiring for more. You know, clearly they want to keep working together. They want to keep doing music, and they want to continue being just experimental artists in the truest sense. But this album shows how hard of a process that's been for them, both in a grieving side and in a business side. And it kind of puts a good picture of what it's like to face loss like this in this world of music as a business. And I feel like it's a really blunt but beautifully painted look into that. You know, you've got this feelings of phantoms in the mist, so to speak, and this looming weight above the listener amidst the guitar samples, both ambient and erratic, with the openers Can I Have You For Myself and Dead Weight. Moments where it feels like Richie is speaking about wanting to grow, wanting to move on, but having this looming presence above them. You know, he sings about yesterday sticking to him like glue on Dead Weight as what feels like growth or expansions on the dissonant, erratic chaos from By the Time I Get to Phoenix get introduced into the more lush-coated atmosphere that is this record, but feels like a great evolution on that style. Zigzag feels like it's sort of in a similar breath, melding more grand ideas and lush piano with this internal conflict and this desire to move on, but still being not stuck to the past, but still have the past looming over you. I also really like how tracks like Grapefruit and Best Interest sort of lock in and hone in that view into the industry side very directly and bluntly. You know, there's bars on Grapefruit talking about people getting swept up in parlays in the industry, while Best Interest talks about potentially some of those same people having your best interest when talking about cutting a deal in the industry. It's two songs where it feels like very much steeped in a little more of dread, and I think that the group does a good job at pulling the listener into that dread, especially on Best Interest. That song is insanely good, and I love how from there the album really tries to give us death and rebirth, so to speak, through the lenses of the sequel to one of the debut tracks from this group, Double Trio. That sort of, we are still here to do what we're doing mantra that was, or that feels like some of the spirit of this project, before giving us N.I. Dance and GGG, two songs that feel like actually audibly presenting the act of dying and being reborn. And I think it's done beautifully. There's some real glitchy distortion throughout the end of And I Dance that is some of like the most new age sounding shit in this realm that I've heard. I love noisy and glitchy hip hop, and I just haven't heard that kind of sound done this way on a track like that. And I absolutely love it. I think this album is a bona fide smash. I didn't think that January would come with this kind of quality, but like similarly to last January, I'm starting this January with another 10. This album is a smash. It's gonna be high on my of the year list. I can almost guarantee that. I think that this album is phenomenal. If you like out there experimental hip hop, if you like seeing artists work through, you know, very hard times for themselves and doing so with just a lot of artistic nuance, this is a great version of that, man. This album is fan-fucking-tastic. Those are my thoughts on what I listened to. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Tell me your thoughts on those records and any records that are coming out this year or that dropped in January that I missed that you'd potentially like me to see me cover in this segment. Again, if you liked it, make sure you give it a like, and if you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week, depending on what I've got going on, and the second part of my 2-controller run in one of my favorite shooter games is dropping this weekend. If that sounds like something interested in, come on back then, but if not, I'll see you in the next one. You guys have good days, lots of situations, and I'll see you another day.